So, estate planning is not something that you usually think about or probably talk about around the kitchen table, but it is so important. And I've had some recent experiences with how an estate plan can go really, really well, or it can go really, really south. So, with that on mind, I wanted to mention a few things that most people don't think about but become very important with your estate planning. The first is here are some documents that are familiar when you think about estate planning. And this doesn't mean that you have a large estate. This simply means what documents you have in place to direct where your money goes after you are gone. I have a client who had a beautiful turn of phrase. She said, Laura, we're all just conduits. And I think that's such a beautiful image. We have money that flows through us while we are here, and the money flows through us to other people after we are gone. So on the screen, we have conduits that are familiar to most people. You've probably heard of a will, a power of attorney, a trust. Also important are the beneficiary forms and transfer on death forms. And if you're not super familiar with those last two, check out Phil's webinar from last month, which was about the significance of selecting beneficiaries. Really important stuff. But today's topic is not about these familiar documents. Rather, it's about documents that you may not be thinking about, but are important in your estate plan. So let's find out what those are next. First, a list of your accounts and contact information. This may be the most important piece of your entire estate plan. Because think about it. If you have set up a beautiful estate plan with your beneficiary forms, a will, a trust, all this stuff, but no one knows about it, well, after you're gone, how is any of that going to happen that you spent all that time setting up? Only if people know, if your executor specifically knows who to contact and what accounts you have. So a list of your accounts and contact information is super important. It can be very simple. We just want to make sure it has who. Who should your executor contact specifically? What are they contacting this person about? Do you have a trust, a will, a bank account, a retirement account? A list of accounts can be very helpful. And where can refer to not only a physical place, like, hey, I have my will in my safe that's in my living room, but it could also refer to the where of where the investments are held. What company are they held at? So a place that you could start for all this information is your balance sheet. Usually a balance sheet is going to list all of your accounts and their balances. Usually a balance sheet doesn't have contact information though. So if we look at the next slide here, what we have at Shadow Ridge is a checklist of important documents. I've had clients tell me this is so helpful because you might forget a thing or two that you have, but you can capture it all on this piece of paper. It's available on our website on our downloads page, by the way. So look for a checklist of important documents. It has financial documents. It has non-financial documents, things like a marriage certificate or a birth certificate for your child, a social security card, other important documents that we need to have as we have our financial lives. But if you know where all of these pieces are and you can communicate that to your executor, that is a super helpful piece of information. So first is that list of contacts and accounts. Next, number 2 in the helpful documents. This is a recent development, relatively new for estate planning, but it's so vital. Think about it. How many times do you access your account information online? Probably all the time, right? Many people have moved to online document vaults or to online access for your accounts rather than having the paper documents anymore. So again, if you have all that, but no one can get into it, that's not helpful. Your executor or your heirs kind of need to know how to access that information. So what is a way you can do that? We'll have a hub for all your passwords and logins. Some clients do this in a notebook, maybe a password book. That's fine if that's your preference. But what I have found is a digital vault is super, super helpful. So making sure that it is up to date is easier with a digital vault than it is with a paper vault. What do I mean by that? In a digital vault, and that could be something like Dashlane, for example, is a digital vault. In a digital vault, you can construct strong passwords that you don't have to remember, and you can update them regularly at a few clicks of a button. This is really helpful because I don't know about you, but I'm always forgetting my passwords. So having a system that will do that for me is really helpful. Also, when you have a digital vault, you can select to share certain documents, certain passwords with certain people. So I could select to share my entire vault with my spouse, for example, so that he has that information if something happens to me. Or I could select to share just one account, login, and password, let's say with a child who needs my rewards number when they're at the grocery store. So you have control over what you share, but having it all in one place, that's the takeaway that I want for you here. So you make sure that you've got it in one spot and one person knows where that spot is. Again, there are several different providers you could choose from on this. Ask friends and family what they use. There are lots of them out there. So that was number 2. Next, for number 3, important in your estate planning is to consider a letter of last instruction. Now, this is different from a will. This letter is for informational purposes only, and it's more informal than a will. It should not include bequests because they would not be binding. However, it can be a very helpful document to create to ease the way for those that you leave behind. What would a letter of last instruction contain? It might be an explanation of any unusual bequests, why you decided to leave the china to your niece and not your nephew, for example. It's to help your heirs so they don't have to guess what you were thinking or try to recall conversations that might be a little bit fuzzy or to defend your instructions. Well, she always said that she'd leave that to me, right? If you leave this information in a letter of last instruction, it can be very helpful because it's basically you telling everyone what you intended and why. You could also remember that a will is a matter of public record. So if you want to say something privately, you could do this in a letter of last instruction. That's helpful to think about as well. A letter of last instruction could also include more of a story behind anything that you're leaving behind. I'll give a personal example. My grandmother passed away last year, and she left a beautiful collection of china and teacups to her heirs. So all of her grandchildren were able to inherit these pieces of history, but we didn't know all the history behind every single piece. So unfortunately, some of that history has been lost because we can't ask grandma, where did you get this beautiful teacup that says it's from Germany? A letter of last instruction could be a place to leave that information if that's important to you so that your heirs know some of the story behind what they are inheriting. And lastly, a letter of last instruction is available as part of our downloads. If you go to the Shadow Ridge downloads page, you will find that checklist of important documents right there. And the last page in that checklist of important documents includes an example of a letter of last instruction, what you might put into it and what you might not want to put into it. A letter of last instruction could also include information about your funeral or your wake and what you have as a vision for that. Again, some people might think that's a little odd, but personal example, my aunts left such information to my mother and her sisters when she passed away. They found this letter of what she wanted her wake to look like. This was so helpful because then her sisters didn't have to try to guess or even to fight about what that funeral should look like. They just followed the instruction and said, well, that's Aunt Karen. That's what she wanted. And it was much easier for them to be able to do that. So there you have it. The 3 essential state documents that you might not have been considering for your financial planning: a list of accounts and contact information, a password vault, and a letter of last instruction. Having these documents, in addition to the familiar documents like a will, can mean the difference between leaving your heirs a frightening ride over the rapids or a peaceful canoe journey down a flowing river. Because remember, you are the conduit for your financial affairs.